Good evening. This is Chet Huntley reporting.
Presented by a new formula ban, the effective deodorant that helps keep you dry. And by denture cream, only toothpaste powerful enough for dentures. Tonight, report on Cuba, October 23rd, 1962.
At 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Eastern Daylight Time, the American blockade of Cuba becomes effective. The President issued his formal proclamation tonight. And he authorized Defense Secretary McNamara to use the Army, Navy, and Air Force in any manner necessary. 25 Russian ships are en route to Cuba on what may be a collision course in more than one sense. 2.5 hours ago, Secretary McNamara concluded a news conference.
As I mentioned a moment ago, I can't predict the exact movements of either Soviet ships or U.S. vessels between now and the time that the quarantine becomes effective at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time tomorrow. I can tell you, if it's of interest to you, that we believe there are about 25 Soviet ships moving toward Cuba, merchant ships. We believe that there are some 10 or 12 Soviet ships in Cuban ports. We believe that there are about 25 Soviet ships moving away from Cuba to return to their home ports. Soviet ships are moving in a stream toward Cuba at varying distances and without endeavoring to indicate their space uniformly, they are at such a large number of varying points from Cuba. I can't answer the question other than to say that many are close to the shores of Cuba. The commander of the U.S. vessel involved will act under orders which have been issued by me through the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the commanders, Admiral Dennison, and through him to the local ship commanders. These orders prescribe particular procedures to be followed. The essence of them is that the U.S. ship, by every means available to it, will communicate with the Soviet or other vessel involved moving toward Cuba, requesting the vessel to stop and accept inspection and search. If the vessel does not stop, refuses to heed the instructions, force will be applied to assure that it does stop. The minimum amount of force for that purpose will be used, taking care to achieve the minimum damage to the vessel and to the personnel on it.
Will they be armed? Who will make them up, and how will they operate?
The boarding parties will be armed, and they will be made up of personnel from the U.S. Navy and associated Marine forces, and they will be in number sufficient to their task. There are a substantial number of other ships moving toward Cuba at the present time, essentially the same number as have been moving toward Cuba at any other similar time in recent weeks. The movement is not exceptional. It is neither large nor small in relation to the past. We do plan, under the terms of the quarantine, to halt and inspect the cargoes of ships of all nations moving into Cuba.
There were these other developments today. Cuban Premier Fidel Castro told his people that the arms blockade is the most dangerous adventure since World War II. He called President Kennedy a pirate and said a life and death struggle is underway between an empire and the revolution of a small and weak people. The Cuban militia was mobilized and the country was put on a war footing. Havana housewives bought up all available baked goods and candles. Russia alerted its military forces and warned that the United States is playing with fire. At a special session of the United Nations Security Council, the United States, Cuba, and Russia offered separate resolutions and traded bitter charges. The Organization of American States approved the arms quarantine by a vote of 19-0. And in London, 2,000 demonstrators broke through police lines to storm the American embassy.
Our report continues in a minute after this message.
It's here, the latest news in roll-on deodorants, a sensationally effective deodorant. New formula ban. Look at the new model ban. The new ban comes in a new design. Ban looks new, it is new. Something wonderful has happened to ban. A fabulous new formula. The new ban formula starts with aluminum chloride hydroxide that helps keep you dry. It also stops odor for 24 hours. Second, ban contains rich emollients to keep your skin soft. And for the first time, polyglycol ethers that let ban roll on with lotion smoothness, evenly and easily. Let the new Ban formula take the worry out of being close. Ban helps keep you dry. Ban stops odor for 24 hours. Don't wait until your old deodorant is used up. Go to your store first thing tomorrow and buy Ban. New formula Ban.
In Cuba, the militia has been mobilized. Havana radio has been exhorting the people all day with cries of fatherland or death, we will conquer. Tonight, Premier Castro is addressing his people. Richard Valeriani of NBC News reports from WCKT Miami.
Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro has been speaking for about an hour to the Cuban people on a nationwide radio and television hookup. This is his first public reaction to the American arms blockade, and Castro is bitterly angry. He called the blockade the most dangerous adventure since the end of World War II. He said the United States undertook the blockade because all its other efforts to destroy the Cuban Revolution have failed. The speech is full of his usual blast at American imperialism. Castro says Cuba has no intention of letting the United States know what weapons it has. He says that Cuba is a sovereign nation not because of the United States, but because Cuba won its own sovereignty. To take it away, he said, the United States will have to sweep us off the face of the earth. While Fidel Castro was sounding off in Havana, President Kennedy's strong words of last night are still being translated into positive action all along the eastern seaboard. This train, loaded with troops and trucks and half-tracks, is moving through Florida tonight. Its destination is unknown.
At the United Nations, representatives of the United States, Russia, and Cuba stated their positions. They seemed irreconcilable. If there was any room for maneuver, it was hard to locate. Here is NBC's United Nations correspondent, Pauline Frederick.
The Security Council is in troubled recess tonight on the Cuban crisis. The lines between the United States and the Soviet Union firmly drawn. Each accuses the other of threatening the world with destruction of the UN and nuclear war. American Delegate Stevenson introduced a resolution demanding that Russian offensive weapons and bases be dismantled and withdrawn from Cuba, with a team of UN observers verifying compliance. The resolution also calls for a prompt meeting between the United States and Russia on war and peace issues, presumably between President Kennedy and Chairman Khrushchev. Soviet Delegate Zorin and Cuban Delegate Garcia Inchostegui both rejected the Stevenson proposal. Zorin introduced a resolution demanding that the Council condemn American aggression and ordered the United States to negotiate with Cuba. Stevenson will undoubtedly oppose this plan tomorrow. The non-aligned nations are trying to draft a compromise, not so much for the Council, but for a special emergency session of the General Assembly when Zorin casts a veto on the American resolution. Here are some of the highlights of today's Security Council meeting.
Mr. President, I am submitting today a resolution to the Security Council designed to find a way out of this calamitous situation. This resolution calls, as an interim measure under Article 40 of the Charter, for the immediate dismantling and withdrawal from Cuba of all missile and other offensive weapons. It further authorizes and requests the Acting Secretary General to dispatch to Cuba a United Nations Observer Corps to assure and report on compliance with this resolution. Upon UN certification of compliance, it calls for the termination of the measures of quarantine against military shipments to Cuba. And in conclusion, it urgently recommends that the United States and the Soviet Union confer promptly on measures to remove the existing threat to the security of the Western Hemisphere and the peace of the world, and to report thereon to the Security Council. The issue which confronts the Security Council is grave. Were it not, I should not have detained you so long. Since the end of the Second World War, there has been no threat to the vision of peace so profound, no challenge to the world of the Charter so fateful. The hopes of mankind are concentrated in this room. The action we take may determine the future of civilization. I know that this council will approach the issue with a full sense of our responsibility and a solemn understanding of the import of our deliberations. There is a road to peace. The beginning of that road is marked out in the resolution I have submitted for your consideration. If we act promptly, we will have another chance to take up again the dreadful questions of nuclear arms and military bases and the means and causes of aggression and of war, to take them up and do something about them. This is a solemn, I believe, and significant day for the life of the United Nations and the hope of the world community. Let it be remembered not as the day when the world came to the edge of nuclear war, but as the day when men resolved to let nothing thereafter stop them in their quest for peace. Thank you, sir.
Now, according to the statement that was made by the delegate of the United States, there are two types of military bases. There are two types of rockets, the good military bases and the bad ones, the good rockets and the bad rockets. And obviously, the government of the United States reserves the right to decide and determine when a rocket is good and when a rocket is bad or naughty, when a base is good and when a base is naughty.
Mr. Stevenson touched upon the question also of bases in various parts of the world. He has, however, failed to mention that the United States have these bases in 35 countries of the world, appropriating to themselves the role of the world policeman. But what is surprising is that Mr. Stevenson has practically said nothing about the grounds, the political and legal and moral grounds based in the Charter of the United Nations for those aggressive acts that were undertaken by the government of the United States over the past 24 hours against the small Cuban state.
For a view of developments as seen from the White House, here is NBC correspondent Ray Sheeran.
This is what you might call a reasonably accurate facsimile of an historic document. Its title is Interdiction of the Delivery of Offensive Weapons to Cuba. This is the paper which clamps a blockade on delivery of arms to Cuba, effective at 10 o'clock in the morning. The President signed it at 7:06 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time tonight. The usually illegible Kennedy scrawl was firm and plain this time, as if the President wanted to be sure that even Nikita Khrushchev could recognize his signature. Mr. Kennedy was solemn and unsmiling as he wrote John Fitzgerald Kennedy to this document, which is intended to move Soviet missiles out of this hemisphere. Within minutes after he signed, the proclamation was going forth to all world capitals, to all foreign ministries. And the taskman who covers the White House was dictating the contents to Moscow. On the embargo list, surface-to-surface missiles, bombers, bombs, air-to-surface rockets, guided missiles, warheads, electronic equipment. All this information the Russian phoned to task headquarters, and from there it went to Moscow. Soon after the President signed these papers, which draw a line for Khrushchev, the man who preceded John F. Kennedy in the White House spoke in Gettysburg about the need to support the President in time of crisis and about the limitations of such support.
As in all international crises, America, as a unit, follows her constitutional leader. We must pray that he be given foresight and wisdom and stout heart. We must pledge him our help in whatever way we can be of help. So far as Cuba and Soviet Russia are concerned, in the weeks ahead, we cannot be partisan. But a united America need not and should not degenerate into a conformist, a silenced America. In our internal affairs, foreign crisis should not become an excuse for compliant submission by Republicans or a shield for Democrats against our valid criticism of them.
Now for some reflections on foreign policy aspects of the situation. Here is NBC State Department correspondent Ellie Abel.
President Kennedy's decision to use force if need be in shutting off the flow of Soviet jets and missiles to Cuba won an overwhelming vote of confidence today in the Organization of American States. Our guest this evening, Assistant Secretary of State Edwin Martin, helped bring about that victory. Mr. Martin is responsible for our relations with the Americas. He speaks no Spanish, does not consider himself any kind of expert on Latin America, but he is widely regarded as one of the most effective men the U.S. has ever entrusted with this tough diplomatic job. Mr. Martin, how do you account for the rather stunning 19-0 victory in the OAS Council as compared with the miseries we went through at Punta del Este a few months ago, mustering 14 votes?
I account for it primarily by the tactics of Mr. Khrushchev and Mr. Castro. The Latin Americans are far from stupid, and it has become clear month by month, and particularly in the last week, that Castro was a Soviet puppet and not a Latin American revolutionary. The Latin Americans are not communist. They fear communism. They are now ready to take a firm stand on behalf of the freedom that they cherish like all the rest of us. And it is evident, I think, quite clearly to them by the methods of deception and aggression that the Soviets have used that now is the time to take a stand, to be solid together in the hemisphere in a way which Mr. Khrushchev has found it so able to do, to solidify his opposition by the way he approaches the problem.
Can we expect that some of the Latin countries will make a tangible contribution to this blockade effort?
Yes, we can. Earlier this evening, the Argentine foreign minister, for example, announced that Argentine naval units would be made available. Discussions are underway with several other countries. I feel sure we will get cooperation from the countries of the hemisphere on the military side.
Mr. Martin, some people have been rather puzzled about why we have chosen to make this issue of jets and missiles to Cuba a matter of direct confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States. American policy for quite a few years now has sought to avoid such a confrontation, to deal through proxies. How do you account for that change?
I think that change is accounted for by the fact that this is a new tactic on the part of the Soviet Union. As the President said last night, the Soviet Union has never placed nuclear missiles outside the Soviet Union, not even in any of the Eastern European satellites. To go outside the Soviet Union and to come to Cuba, a direct affront to the United States at its doorstep, is evidence of a major new tactic by the Soviets, and unless we stand firm against it and demonstrate that we will not tolerate it, he will be encouraged to make other ventures equally bold elsewhere. It's a matter of standing now or giving up.
I'm sure a great many Americans would agree with that general view, sir. I wonder, though, how is it that we have acted just now rather than, say, 3 or 4 weeks ago when some people, including New York Senator Keating, were telling this country that those intermediate-range missiles were in Cuba?
Over the past several weeks, we've gotten a good many reports, principally from Cuban exiles, of missiles bases in Cuba. We've tracked down every one of them, and heretofore they have all turned out to be the reports of not well-informed people about the SAM missile sites, the ground-to-air missiles. It was only when we were able to resume air flights after some storm conditions in the recent, just about a week ago, that we first saw what were clearly not ground-to-air missiles, but were clearly ground-to-ground, medium-range nuclear missile bases under construction. This is new evidence that we did not have before.
Mr. Secretary, what's our answer to the Soviet contention that their military buildup in Cuba is no more of a threat to the U.S. than our bases in Turkey are to the Soviets?
Our bases in Turkey, as you say, are in fact NATO bases, established there as a result of a decision of the NATO Council in December 1957, at a time when the Soviets had missiles trained on Europe. We had no missile response, and were in a definitely difficult strategic situation. It was done publicly and openly as part of the NATO Warsaw Pact confrontation.
This is a quite different situation than bringing these missiles into the Western Hemisphere, which is had on a secret basis, where we've had our own defense arrangements and security arrangements under the Rio Pact for many decades.
I'm afraid our time is about to run out. I just wanted to ask one very brief question. You'll remember what happened in '56, Budapest and Suez. Are we going to have that kind of juxtaposition of favorable and unfavorable events again in the next few days?
I don't think anybody knows whether this will escalate militarily, or if it does, where it will or how it will. This is what everybody is preparing for, so that the position of the West will be defended at all costs.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. This is Ellie Abel, NBC News, reporting from Washington.
Our report continues in a minute after this message.
Why can't I clean the stains off my dental plates with toothpaste?
Because regular toothpaste is too mild for dentures. Regular toothpaste must be mild enough for use inside the mouth on tender gums and teeth like hers. But now there's a toothpaste made especially for denture wearers. New Denture Cream, the only toothpaste powerful enough for dentures. Because Denture Cream is used outside the mouth, it can contain stain removers, a deodorizer, and a special denture polisher, too powerful for family toothpaste. What? This denture material was stained with a common but concentrated denture stain, then baked in an oven for 4 days. See how easily Denture Cream removes even strong stains, and with proved safety. No stains, no tartar when you use Denture Cream daily. Result, no denture odor. Remember, to get your dentures clean, really clean, you need new Denture Cream, the only toothpaste powerful enough for dentures.
In his speech last night, President Kennedy spoke in sympathy and sorrow to the captive people of Cuba. Well, what is the mood of the Cuban people? NBC's John Lavicek returned from Cuba only 5 days ago.
Cuba no está sola. Cuba is not alone. Posters like this went up all over Cuba after the Soviet Union issued its warning last month that an attack against Cuba could mean war. The Soviet announcement gave a new shot in the arm to Castro's regime. A Cuban friend of mine who had been in jail at the time reported his jailer seemed to take on new stature. The Russians were on their side. The Russian entry into the picture shattered the already shaky morale of those Cubans who oppose Castro and who are only waiting for American Marines to come and liberate them. In Cuba today, where the going is tough and getting tougher, there is no middle ground. You are either fanatically loyal to Castro or you are against him. For example, a Cuban doctor dedicated to the revolution commented on the number of doctors who had fled to Miami. We are well rid of them, he said. Many of them were abortionists, dope peddlers, and society doctors. We are going to train a new breed of young doctors worthy of their calling, and the Soviet Union will help us. Another doctor who is against Castro grumbled that the medical standard has gone way down and probably will never be the same. But he, like thousands of others of the upper middle classes and professional ranks, are passive resistors. Castro's new Cuba rests on young shoulders, students, the army, and his secret police. Upcountry people, farmers, and factory workers are losing their enthusiasm. Agricultural and industrial production is falling. But the revolution goes on. And with new massive Russian help, Castro believes he will finally succeed.
Britain, with some misgivings and perhaps a backward look to its Suez adventure of 1956, announced today its support for the American action. NBC's senior European correspondent, Joseph C. Harsh, reports from London.
It was done more in duty than in joy under the accompaniment of a real riot in front of the American embassy, but the British government fell into step with Washington on Cuba today. After a full cabinet meeting, the Foreign Office issued a formal statement accusing Russia of deception and of opening a new area of instability. The British delegation at the United Nations is instructed to support the American resolution. Foreign Minister Lord Hume has declared in a televised speech that the Americans are right to let the world see plainly what is being done by the communists under their noses. These were the important things that happened here today, important because it would have been so easy for the government to take the other way out and go for fence-sitting or neutralism. The first public reaction this morning was sketched by newspaper editorials. Only one in the Tory Daily Express gave solid comfort and support to Washington. All others either wavered or criticized. There is much public anxiety. Everywhere people gathered in earnest little groups, the talk was always Cuba. Few people cheered. The stock market bumped down long and hard, and the price of gold soared. And never has there been a rougher, uglier riot in front of the American embassy than today. It lasted nearly 3 hours. At its peak, some 2,000 persons charged police lines, broke them, and nearly reached the glass front doors of the embassy. Casualties were cuts and bruises, not lives, but it proved how bitter is the left wing. Britain is moving with us, but it is a slow process, and there's plenty of angry minority opposition. This is Joseph C. Harsh, NBC News, London.
There are two aspects to this new crisis. First, there are the legalities and the moral issues. Second, there is the grim confrontation of raw and naked power. And as clearly as we are given to see the problem now, the choice is up to the Soviet Union, whether resolution or easement shall occur in the area of legality and the moral issues, or in the area of power. It's an unhappy circumstance that such a decision should rest with the men of the Kremlin. Another disquieting feature is the realization that the Russians have so boldly and brashly and recklessly extended themselves this far in Cuba. It not only makes their retreat embarrassing and difficult, but it leads us toward the conclusion that they must be confident and that their Cuban adventure is more than a gambit. Well, fortunately, the lessons of recent history offer some optimism. In Iran, in Berlin, in Greece, in Austria, we have seen the Soviet Union back down before. The legalities and moralities will be argued in the UN, and to what conclusion we cannot foresee. Votes or expressions of support in the OAS, in NATO, in the UN, or wherever, are important to us in this area of non-force. However, if Khrushchev elects force, he has really then given us no choice at all, for the world cannot forever endure this sort of Soviet pressure. British Foreign Secretary Lord Hume said it to the British people only today. At the United Nations last year, I said that no genuine peace would come to the world until this double dealing was exposed. I find it necessary to repeat that. These practices in double dealing must cease, and cease now. Communists, he said, must not, repeat, not, be allowed to filch away free territory from free men. This is Chet Huntley reporting. Good night.
Join Chet Huntley and David Brinkley for the most complete up-to-the-minute coverage of the November elections. That's Tuesday, November 6th, starting at 7 p.m. live across the nation here on NBC. Next week in the same time period, watch the Second Vatican Council in color here on NBC. Chet Huntley reporting has been brought to you by New Formula Ban, the effective deodorant that helps keep you dry, and by Denture Cream, only toothpaste powerful enough for dentures.